All right, welcome everybody. Give you a few seconds for everybody to get connected and log in, and we'll get started. So welcome back to our third installment of our supply chain webinar series. I think most of you have been on the ones prior to, but for those of you that haven't, just a quick overview. My name is David Carrick. I'm the Associate Director of the West Virginia University Industrial Extension. Through our partnership with NIST MEP, we've received some funding to support these educational sessions about supply chain to help small manufacturers build a domestic supply chain for the products we need. The more we make in America, obviously, the stronger our manufacturing economy becomes. And call me selfish, but maybe I want more of that to be made in West Virginia as much as humanly possible. So while we don't currently offer any specific supply chain services, we want to learn as much as we can about the interests and needs and questions that everybody may have so we can create a service that supports West Virginia growth in a way that will be very helpful to those that need impacted by this. Um, it's important for us to give you the best information possible about that. And that's why, again, we have Adam Lowe with us here. He's an expert in supply chain management and has a very practical approach to understanding and applying this. If you've been with us through the previous two sessions, he gave us a great overview and a lot of definitions last week. And I think this week we're going to see where all that starts to come together and really kind of start to build a picture of what supply chain really is. For those of you that don't know Adam, he's a native West Virginian. He graduated from WVU, served in the military. And in addition to having experience working with a tier one DoD supplier, he started this consulting practice to support the nationwide effort to bring manufacturing back to America. We'll be recording this session so you can play it back as you need and catch up on any of the details you might miss. If you have any questions, please place those in the chat. I'll be monitoring that throughout, and we'll either hold those to the end or I'll interrupt Adam as we go if it's something important to that particular slide. So with that, Adam, welcome and thanks for being here again with us.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Dave and team. I know there's a lot of folks there at the WVUIE group who are doing great work, as you said, to bring business, specifically manufacturing, back to the United States, and that's a big mission. And as you said, I will second that. I want to see it come to West Virginia. So in that same vein, we've been working together to see what we can do to give those tools and skill sets to the small manufacturers, medium, large manufacturers, whoever will come to the state. We want you there, so we want to give you the tools that you need. So I appreciate you bringing me in. Thank you to the team. Thank you for showing up again. All of you who have been with us since the beginning, or if this is your first time, I will do an overview, a brief of what we've done on the past couple webinars. So don't feel like you're going to be too far left behind. And if you can think of anybody else who might be within your supply chain group, reach out to them, let them know what's happening here. We've got another 2 more weeks beyond this week of the series. So please reach out to them. It's always good to have suppliers helping other suppliers, especially those who are feeding you or you're feeding within the supply chain. Bring them in. Let's help each other out. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and jump into some of the slides here for today. As Dave said, today is going to bring a little bit more of it together about kind of what we started out with. So for today, just a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about positioning your supply chain. Essentially, this was the course that will identify what a good supplier looks like when you're really hitting on all cylinders, and you can leverage the different things that you do well. This is what you're going to look like today. So I will do a quick review of the past two webinars, and then I'll jump into a slide that kind of breaks out some key elements of your operation that you can use to kind of leverage a specific area or skill set that you have internally to gain more clients or to position yourself within a supply chain. And it gives you kind of an anchor to kind of found which type you might be. And that is the cost, speed, quality, and rarity. So one of those things, or multiple, a combination of those, might make you a really beneficial and attractive supplier to different customers for different needs. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about those best practices, kind of break those out of what a good supplier looks like within certain realms, and you'll see when we get to that slide what those realms are. And then I'll go to the final slide and we'll communicate the advantages, kind of how do you communicate your cost, speed, quality, and rarity, those key pieces with that your best practices? How do you convey that to a customer? How do you convey that even down maybe upstream to your suppliers who are feeding you? And how can you work together to be the best kind of supply group as you're kind of going on down the chain to the final consumer? Um, so let's go ahead and jump into the review piece. So in session one, I have a couple of notes there from session one. The first thing that we talked about was aligning with your company why. That's kind of like your vision or your mission or what you're out to do. It's not how you do it or what you do, but it's like why, what drives you, and ensuring that your supply chain group internally, maybe the folks who are in your procurement team, the folks who are doing supplier identification, who are reaching out to find vendors, who are entertaining contracts for vendors to supply you with material or raw material in some way. How do you align that group who kind of reaches outside of your company? How do you align them with what your company is there to do at a foundational level? Again, your values, your mission, your what drives you to do what you do as a company. Aligning that is really important because it helps you again with explaining who and what you are to others, and kind of gives you a foundation to stand on as you go out into the world and you look for vendors and things like that. Then we talked about using your supply chain network to find additional streams of revenue. So thinking kind of bigger picture. Could you possibly have something internally that is a skill set that you have that you can leverage into another product line? Can you reach out with your supplier group and find out maybe what either your vendors or your customers need and develop something internally that could give you another revenue generating either product or even using your knowledge base as a product to sell. So that gives you more to your bottom line. So thinking a little bit bigger about what you do and what you might be able to do, and then applying that to the structure of your business to make yourself a more kind of wider reaching supplier, and again bring in more money. And then in session two, I won't go into a lot of this. We will use a lot of the terminology throughout the next two courses and then in the final course as well. We will talk a little bit more about the terms, but that was a kind of a very term heavy webinar. So we have some handouts for that as well. If you want to go back and find that send out that the group sent out from the last one, it does have the terms and kind of a brief definition of what we talked about. But in that one, we kind of walk through what from a developmental product all the way through to final shipment to a customer, and the different departments that might grab a hold of some of that process. And we talked a little bit about the terms that you might hear that would be supply chain centric type terms and what they mean when you're in that situation. So would encourage you, if you haven't seen that one, to jump back into that to get a little bit more of that terminology if something sounds confusing. But again, if you have a question, by all means, reach out there in the middle, and I'll be happy to answer those. All right. So let's jump right into cost, speed, quality, and rarity. Now, there are probably other kind of baseline, we'll call them buckets or ideas of what might make you a really good supplier to someone. But when I was kind of thinking through what makes a good supplier, generally speaking, these four elements continue to pop up. Either you have a cost, you're very cost effective, a low cost items that most likely have some of the other elements weaved in, but your key piece might be cost. Your key piece might be the speed at which you can deliver your material to a customer. The quality of your material might just be far and away above the others that are in the market right now, and you can use these different elements as well as rarity. Which rarity is it's a term that I kind of came up with just almost like as a bucket term, because there's a lot of different things that you can kind of throw into the rarity category. You might be someone who doesn't have a lot of competition, but there might not even be maybe a ton of need for that piece. It could be kind of a rare piece that you sell, and it could just be a separate product line that you have, but not a lot of people make it. So there's kind of a lot that might fall into that rarity category. The vast majority of the time, you'll see cost, speed, and quality as your three main kind of contenders that make you a very a very advantageous supplier for a different group, depending on what they need. So one of the things you have to ask yourself is, what is your potential customer value. And generally speaking, what I like to ask is, what problem am I solving for them? Do they have a need to have lower cost? And that might sound like, if you're having a discussion with a potential customer that says, it's going to be a very cost heavy discussion. You're going to hear a lot of that. Well, what are we doing to drive costs down? What are your costs? How much would it cost for this? When cost comes up a lot during those discussions, just, of course, make the mental note of that. They're very cost, averse. They want to make sure that their costs are low. So what is it within your group that, how you pitch that as your the lower cost product within, to help market yourself as that key supplier for them. Again, when you're having those same type of discussions, if you hear a lot of problems they're having with speed. Well, we just can't get a delivery on time. Our deliveries are backed up, or we need something. We need to be sending out this earlier in the, whatever. How do you look at your operation and things and say, this is how we can pitch ourselves as the speedier, or we are the quicker. We can supply that whatever product in a timelier fashion, because that's what they're looking for. So as a supply chain person, especially if you're in procurement, or if you're potentially in sales, or those type of even vendor selection is really important as well. If you have subcomponents coming in, and you know that the majority of your market needs a really quick turn to get their material, that might determine how you, as a supply chain person picking those vendors, you might be willing to pay a little bit extra for that subcomponent, as long as you can get that speed as well, so that you can pass that speed along as the solution to your potential customer. So if that's where the nature of your business, those are the types of things, if you're sitting at the table, that you need to be thinking about when it comes to speed. Quality is the same type of a concept. What is it within your operation, generally speaking? We'll talk a little bit more about this on the next page, but what is it about your operation that you can pitch, so that someone who might be coming up with a lot of those quality questions, or if you know that they're in an industry that has very heavy regulation per quality, what can you do within your own operation and within your supply chain to pitch to them that you are you have the highest amount of quality? What data are you using to back that up? Things like that are, you can start to pick those little elements out as a supply chain person, that's having maybe that first contact, or you're reaching out and looking for those bids, or whatever it is you're doing. You can have that insight that might be very valuable to your group. And you might be the one that says, hey group, listen, operations, we get questions all the time about quality, quality, quality. What are we doing in operations? So you might be able to sit down at the table with your operations folks and say, we really need to put something within our operations strategy that shows how we are addressing the quality issue, that we're making sure we have, reviews and tests and whatnot, if that, pertains to your different operations. But those are the types of things, if you start to hear that a lot, that you can bring to the table that will help your operation. And again, one of the notes that I made in the first webinar was that supply chain really works its way through every part of your organization. You are a supplier on the chain. So everything within your organization can be considered part of the supply chain. That includes operations. It includes, any support that's within your operation. How are they using these same types of thoughts in order to make the entire operation better? And how are we all working together in the supply, supply chain proper groups, maybe like your procurement, warehousing, or whatever, shipping, whatever. How are we taking that knowledge that we know, especially working ourselves? Because a lot of us are on the outside, or at least the company facing element of supply chain. How can we understand what's happening in the world around us and feed that back in to the overall operation, so that they can be just as effective as members of the supply chain as we are? Um, and again, I'll hammer that last piece. We are solutions providers when we're coming up with a product. The product wouldn't be useful if there was no need for it. And the way I look at that is that you're just creating a solution to a problem, or you're creating a solution for someone. So having that solutions mindset and kind of weaving that into all your operation and your supply chain proper, weaving that in is very helpful, because it forces you to be a better supplier. And so that said, we'll go on into the next slide. I will pause real quick to see if anybody has any questions from that slide, and if not, we can just keep on rolling. See anything popping up? Dave or Jamie, anybody out there? Okay. I want to make sure that I stop here because there might be a few more questions on this week than last.
Nothing to chat about.
All right, well done. All right, thank you, Dave. All right, let's jump into this one now. Best practices. All right, this is going to be the fun one. Look, I've been looking forward to this one all week. So best practice. What is it that distinguishes you as a best supplier for someone? So this has come from years of kind of weaving and sorting through call them difficult suppliers. So that's kind of where this is coming from. And one of the things that I boiled it down to when I was really thinking hard about putting this slide together was, what is that top level issue that we have had, and I've had experience with it, with suppliers that kind of um, calls calls the issues that maybe don't need to be caused within an operation. And it boils down to integrity and trust, generally speaking. And what that is essentially it's trustworthiness and then a baseline of trust. And I know it's a really deep kind of concept to be bringing up on a supply chain webinar, but really what it is do you believe that your suppliers are going to be able to provide what they say they're going to be able to provide, and when they say they're going to be able to provide it? And if you're a note taker, I will kind of bring this up as a note that you might want to take down. One of the key things that any of us in the supply chain group, any of us in operations can do is be prepared for this question. It is, where is my stuff and when am I getting it? Those are the two main things. Now, there's a lot of things that might roll into that. How much does it cost and all that good stuff too. But the two key things, especially within the operations portion, and once you've already landed that contract, where's my stuff and when am I getting it? And are you meeting those two key elements, either the knowledge of what is happening with their item that they've ordered from you, or when are you getting it to them? And those are going to be a lot of the questions that you're going to receive within a supply chain proper position. If you're doing a customer facing position, you're going to get that question a lot. So how do we deal with that? So you're going to see a couple of notes on the slide that deal directly with that, but we'll start with the expertise. So as a good supplier, if you're going to market yourself as a key supplier, you're going to know your industry, you're going to know your own operation, you're going to know your product. Knowledge of a knowledgeable um, supplier is a trustworthy supplier in your mind. At least that's the first thing you're going to think of. If you know what you're talking about, and it's very evident you know what you're talking about, that creates a sense of, okay, deep breath. I'm good. I'm working with someone who actually understands what we're really dealing with here. Um, Another good piece here, as far as knowledge of operation, knowledge of your potential customer's operation as much as you can. Doing a little bit of legwork as a supplier, if you're reaching out, you're getting ready maybe to supply for someone, or even knowledge of the operation of your suppliers is really beneficial because it helps to position you in a sense of with a sense of actionable intelligence, right? So if you need to have that intelligence and you have it, you're going to be able to position yourself more um, as a knowledgeable element on the supply chain. And you can even develop a lot, like as I was saying earlier, you can develop some even lines of support by just being knowledgeable. For instance, let's say you are getting ready to supply um, a customer with apart from something that's very kind of standard in your industry, and maybe there's regulations within your own industry that you understand, and these parts need to be built to a certain spec, and that supplier might not, or the customer, maybe they are relatively new, they don't have that knowledge base that you have. um if you can demonstrate an element of knowledge of that industry, who do you think they're going to go back to when they need to understand more downstream? They're going to go to the person who is very knowledgeable at that meeting that they had with the specific part that you're providing for them. So then you can say, even, if we go down to the solutions piece, and I'll weave a lot of this into the other ones because the solutions is kind of a key element of this, taking the extra step. So being willing to help them out and understand what their needs are. If they come back to you and say, we really didn't understand this part of the regulation, we didn't. If you're saying, hey, well, we really understand that, we know it really well, we'd like to set up a meeting with you for an hour just to chat through it. We know that, that can be confusing, but here's some more knowledge from our industry that you might not have had, and we are a knowledge base for you. Now, you can even potentially leverage that into another product line and say, well, we'll send people out to your operation to help you get up to speed or up to snuff and it only costs X, Y, and Z. You can set all that up as a potential stream of revenue as well. But just taking the extra step and being willing to reach out as a knowledgeable supplier helps to build that integrity and trust. Um, Operations. So a sense of systems and processes. So this is really important as well because a lot of data comes out of systems and processes within your operation. And again, so we're weaving supply chain. That's kind of the big picture supply chain ideology weaves it right into your operations processes as well. They're not really two separate entities. If you think of them as again, your whole group is on that supply chain. So you are a supplier. If you're weaving in your supply chain operation into your actual manufacturing operations or whatever other operations you have that are more kind of tangible and less maybe supply chain centric, that gives your supply chain group the ability to reach back and say, do you want to know why we are the best supplier? Do you want to know how we do things? Well, here's how. This is knowledge of your operation, and then the operation actually being founded on systems and processes. And so, what that looks like is generally speaking, I say it's a system of systems, so that you don't have to be necessarily personnel centric. And this is good for your supply chain team as well as your operations team. Being able to look at a process to adjust as opposed to a person. So an example of this might be. Um, and this is going to work in tandem with B as well with a maintenance system. So what I've always said, and let me back up just a bit, is when you're creating systems and you're creating processes within those systems, um, that can be fantastic. And it can also fail drastically if you don't have a maintenance plan for how you ensure that your systems and your processes continue to be done. So an example of that might be, you know, you determine that the way you stack and store your incoming supply, your incoming material is just all over the place. It's wild. It's half of it's in one building, half of it's another. And so you say, you know what, let's come up with a better system to because we're business is picking up. We need to have a better way of kind of storing this. Let's create some sort of an Excel sheet that tells us where we've put our items and all that good stuff. We've got signage up that says this goes here, this goes here. It's all the visual element. And if you're picking up notes of lean, you're right. A lot of my ideology comes from somewhat of a lean framework. I kind of weaved in lean and some other frameworks. But if you come up with a system that has, reduces the waste, it has specific places to put your material and all this good stuff, that's great. And you have Johnny or John's taking care of all that. He's out there and he's the one that puts it together. He's got the racks up, he's got the signs up. That's fantastic. That's really great. And once a week, John goes out there and he reconfigures the system. He puts all the stuff back where it's supposed to be, brings it in, he notes it in, he got the whole system going. It's great. You have a really good system in place. Then John leaves. He takes a job. He's so good. He got a promotion. He's at another area of your plant, and then he leaves. And then you come to find out you start going to your shelves and things don't look quite like they did last week and the week after, and then all of a sudden it's out of control. So creating a system of maintenance is what might have been missed there. So what plan did John have in place that let him know every week I do this? And then how did you document that? So that's part of that maintenance, creating a good system and a good system of systems, so that it's not specific to just John, because John knows it and he might have created a great system and a process, but he also if you create that maintenance system, then you can pass that down the line. It's not based on just John's historic knowledge of how to run this system. So that's the reason why I weave that both in together. And then within your supply chain operations, it's the same thing. It might just be a system of following up with key vendors to make sure that their delivery dates are still coming in on time. Because especially, let's say you're a very speed heavy organization, so you look at the speed, and that's you've said, hey, this is what we're really good at. Where we can get this turned around to you quickly. Or your vendors, if you're not managing them to the same expectation that you have for your own self, and they start getting a little bit out of bed with their deliveries, then that could cause you to get out of bed with your deliveries. So if you're going to pitch yourself as the speed vendor or the speed supplier, that's something that you may want to have in place as a system of maintenance on how you maintain that key part of your business. And again, documenting it is really important. and being able to speak to it is really important. And as I said, there's a lot of data that can come out of that. Because once you have those systems of maintenance, if you have that system just in Excel, or even if it's a spreadsheet, even if it's a written sheet, you can pull out that data and see if you need to improve on certain elements. So let's say part of that data is the delivery dates for your vendors. And I was just saying, you needed a system of maintenance for your supply chain to ensure that your vendors are delivering on time. Well, maybe part of John's system is to put the delivery dates on when the stuff actually got to him so that he could put it on the shelf. Well, if you start noticing that there's a few key suppliers that are missing some of those delivery dates, or the POs aren't lining up specifically, but again, you're pitching yourself as a speed vendor, that might be areas of opportunities that your supply chain can then go back in, and whoever is communicating with your vendor to start saying, what's going on here? How can we help you meet these dates? It could help you just to kind of view your operation as a way of almost a backstop to some of the other supply chain centric operations that might be going on. And that's just a general example. And the last little note that I had down there is overspeed. So, as I just mentioned lean, and within the lean process, we do, and I will make a bit of a pitch for Dave and his group. They are fantastic with lean. They understand it extremely well. So if lean is something that you're interested in, I'm sure David would like to have a conversation with you. So that's just an aside, a little pitch there for them. But I've worked with them in the past, and they really know what they're doing when it comes to lean. So if you have any questions about that, I'm sure they'd be happy to answer them. Um, but then that being said, I'm going to talk a little bit about overspeed. So the way that some folks might look at overspeed is not quite lean. And you might look at it as a buffer, or you might look at it as a waste. So you're wasting potential time on the factory floor. And overspeed is basically just being able to pump up really quickly if you need to quick turn something. So not getting all the way to 100% capacity in your operation. Being able to have a little bit of buffer there at the top end so that if you need to kick it into fifth gear and pump out some extra material, you have that ability to do that. And a really good system of systems and maintenance of those systems gives you a much better understanding of your operation and what kind of overspeed you have and what you can pitch as a potential for your company moving forward as well, as far as being able to, how can you become the best supplier? Well, if you have the ability to be that quick turn when it's needed, and you create an actual lane for that within your operation, you can pitch that as saying, listen, we know that sometimes you need something more quickly than what we have the natural time to turn it around, but we also have a bit of leeway in how we deliver. If you're that type of a supplier that can tell me that, to say, yeah, I can ramp up if I need to pretty quickly to a certain degree. Now, granted, you don't want too much waste at the top end, of course. But if you can do that, if you can position yourself as that type of a company, that creates that, again, we're trying to create that integrity and trust. It creates that little bit of fear mitigation, we'll call it, within your potential customer. Okay, they're going to be good. They'll be able to meet it if we really need to ramp up quickly. Um, Another kind of pitching back over to the solutions piece, what solutions can you start creating within that mentality of having the overspeed? And this is just a thought. What solutions can you start to be thinking about? What if a customer does come to you and say, we need to triple our order, and you just don't have that buffer? Things like that. Being able to provide that kind of immediate response, or immediate understanding of your operation, and being able to communicate that is coming to the table with solutions, which is fantastic. Always good as a supplier. That's what you want to look for with the supplier. If you're discussing something and they're like, well, this is a potential option, this is a potential option, just shows that they've got a mastery. And again, it's all about creating that trust. I trust that they're going to be able to help us out if we need that. So just some thoughts like that as far as solutions are concerned as well. Communication. This is a really, really big one, as we all know. And there's this general kind of thought that it's almost always good to over communicate, and I would say that's right in some cases, but I specifically noted the timely and precise. As you all know, especially those who wear many hats, and your workload is kind of at the max, and you just don't have time. You can't read an email or have a conversation with someone for 45 minutes about something that could have taken 5, right? So being precise is kind of where that comes in, and timely is, bad news doesn't age well. That's something I say all the time. It's if you're not going to be able to meet a delivery, if you're not going to be able to meet an expectation, waiting a few weeks until Monday after the good long weekend, that is probably not the best strategy for a supplier that you're looking to be kind of your top level, top tier supplier. If you have an issue, of course, again, I mentioned coming to the table with solutions. Think through it. Think at your operation. What can you do to solve it? You've got an issue, you're going to miss a delivery, you're going to, let's say a machine on the floor blows up and you're going to have to replace it or repair it, and it's going to take your line down for 2 solid weeks. You're going to be 2 weeks late on your delivery. Waiting a week into that delay, being overdue a week, and then providing that information is not super helpful to your customers. So getting that information out there in a timely manner, and then coming to the table with the solution, and it might be, we've got some parts on hand, we've got parts on order, we're going to be working on this immediately. We already had half of your order done when it blew up, so we're going to send, if it's helpful to your operation, we're going to send out, what we have now, and then we'll fulfill the rest. Like those type of solutions that you can think through before you get on that phone call is important, again, because you're going to hear, well, where is my stuff and when's it going to get to me? That's what they're going to ask you. What are you doing to make this right? So having all that prepared and ready as a supplier, and a supply chain personnel who's going to be communicating that to your customer, that's really important to kind of get that framework. Again, what does it do? It ensures that it builds that trust, it builds that integrity. Well, this company has already thought through that. They've already thought through the problem. They already realize, you know, that it's an issue, and they're coming up with solutions. And they might not be the right solutions. Doesn't mean that you have to have all the right answers when you go. I mean, maybe in discussions you'll find out a better solution when you get onto that phone call. But at least you've been timely about it. You let them know when there's been an issue, and then you've been precise with your communication. Precision might look like this. You have an issue with a subcomponent, and you're building, a grouping of subcomponents together or whatever, and one of those has had a quality issue. And you're going to need to reorder 20 of them in order to build the top level part. You communicate that, and again, there is proprietary stuff, and I do understand that. So if it's proprietary, if it's a thing like that, obviously you don't want to over communicate that. You don't want to communicate that type of thing. But if there's just a part number that is a subcomponent that they already know is in there, and that's the subcomponent you're having issues with, the precision and the timeliness comes in saying, hey, this is the part number that we're having issues with. It's causing this quality issue and whatnot, right? So you give them the key pieces of information. It's quick, it's timely, it's professional, and it's cordial, and that's good. But it's really kind of precise on what issue you're facing. You never know when that precision can pay off like this. That subcomponent, let's say that you're going to order 20 of, that is a 6 week lead time, and you're not going to get it for 6 weeks. Maybe your customer also uses that part number, and they've got 20 sitting on the shelf that aren't being used right now. And maybe that's a solution that they come up with that you wouldn't have thought about, that they can say, well, we've got 20 of them, we'll give them to you. We just need that part. There's a lot of potential solutions that can come out of the precision and being able to communicate those key elements of what's holding you back so that you can work together. Now, I'll tell you, when you have that type of a relationship, if you're in that kind of nature of a business, and not every business is that kind of closely related, and not every part that you order is a custom build. Most of the time, this is when you see this type of communication coming out as a custom build type deal, or a longer build, or a more complex type of a process that's needed. But when you have that kind of communication channel, and you have that relationship with your vendor, or when you have that relationship with your customer, solutions start popping up that you wouldn't have thought about. So kind of creating that baseline, again, it builds that integrity, it builds that trust. Like you're becoming that trustworthy supplier. And that's how you move your way up from being a general supplier to being kind of the top supplier, key supplier. And in fact, I've seen this work out where, you know, other product lines have been created from thin air because you're such a good supplier that a company that might have a lot of money to spend wants you to build another thing that you don't even build right now. You might have the capability. They're helping you at that point to say, listen, could you build this thing? I mean, I know you have this machinery and you have this in your shop. Is there any way you can kind of fabricate this for us? Because, we'd really like to work with you on this. And you can start to develop other product lines based off of just being such a great supplier that's easy to work with, it's trustworthy, communicative. You have a really good operation that's built on the back of systems of systems, and you can show a knowledge base of your industry and your operation that is really strong. Those opportunities can come about. Now, will they always come about? Probably not, but they can because you have put yourself into that top tier level supplier, and people want to work with you when you're that trustworthy, when you're that good at what you do. Um, and this is the key one. Now, this is the big one. As a supplier, um, delivery is extremely important for us. Again, where's my stuff and when am I going to get it? Are you meeting your deadlines? That's huge, and that's one of the things that almost every industry I've worked with, has issues with to some degree. Are these late orders coming in, not being shipped out on time, and the whole deal? So that's a difficult one. It's really hard and it's complex. So there's no nail in the coffin that's going to make you the best at deadlines. I would say the more systems you have in place and processes to document those systems, the more formal you can be with that, it will help you to do that root cause analysis downstream so that you can actually point back to what is really causing those issues if you are meeting deadlines. I'm not going to go in depth this week about that, but if you're interested in some solutions to some of these items, come back next week because I'll be talking about if these things are kind of something that's within your organization that you're trying to create plans for, how do you identify them, and then how do you come up with solutions to solve those? That's next week's webinar, so please come back for that. But it is a major issue as far as deadlines are concerned. And then meeting expectations. Are you sending the material that you say you're going to send? Is it making it to your customer the way you said it was, and the way you framed out within your contract, or the way that, are you providing that material that you say you're going to provide? That is another integrity and trust. If you're saying your components have capabilities to do X, Y, and Z, and they're just not meeting those capabilities, that can be an operations issue, and it can be a supply chain issue because maybe your supply chain person overpromised and you're under delivering, right? So that's another thing. Your messaging is really important, and the knowledge of your operation and product is really important in supply chain, so that you're not trying to just gain that business at all cost and quoting things that might not be exactly accurate. You want to make sure that you have that legit understanding of your product and what you're selling, so that you can meet those expectations wherever those products are going. And then I noted mutual flexibility. So this is an interesting one, and comes into play when you're talking about suppliers and looking for customers who fit within your kind of scope and model as well. So um, not everybody who wants your product will ultimately end up being your customer. And there's an element of really needing business, and I totally understand that. But then there's an element too of recognizing when you may have a customer that will be almost impossible to supply to the level at which they would expect. So their expectations may be extremely high, and taking on that customer, maybe with the knowledge that it would be extremely difficult to meet the expectations early on, or they're asking for 10,000 units above what you've ever delivered per month, or something like that, and just taking that because you just want to try for the business. There's an element of being of reaching, I think, that is reasonable. And when you look especially at your operations, your systems, and your data, and they tell you you've created these process improvement plans and you've been able to deliver more and more per month over month, and you can look at that trajectory and you're getting better and better, and you say, well, there's a customer who wants 5% more than what we've ever done, but we actually have a trajectory to meet that, and I can show you in the data where that is. And I can show you the process improvements we've done to increase our ability to meet that. That gives, again, if you say, yes, customer, this is 5% ever over what we've ever been able to deliver per month. However, let me show you this. This is what we've been doing in our factory. This is what we're aiming to do. This is how we're growing. These are some of the processes that we're continuing to improve on. And this is the trajectory of what we've been able to deliver month over month over the past year. Being able to point to that data, again, it quells the fear of taking you on as a supplier because it shows that you have a mastery of what your operation looks like and what you can do. And even if you say, listen, you know, here's what we would do to mitigate the potential of not being able to meet that. We can, if you come up with strategies on how you can deliver the product, maybe partially, things like that. There's a lot of solutions that you can come up with. And that kind of brings us down to the last bullet point there is the solutions. One more note about the mutual flexibility, though, and it's on both sides. So is there an element of of flexibility that your potential customer has? If they're extremely rigid, you just have to know if you don't have that overspeed or bandwidth to be able to meet it. That's something that may or may not determine whether or not you actually want to put in a bid for it. It could be like a no, I'd rather not bid it. I'd rather not go after that customer just because I don't think that we're going to be able to meet that. And then having some flexibility internally as well. And again, that goes back to the overspeed piece. Do you have any flexibility, or are you at max capacity? Things like that are something you should consider when you're thinking about how do we build a trustworthy company, and how do we build a trustworthy element of a supply chain for someone else and our supply chain. Um, so yeah, let's pop down the solutions. So I know I've kind of talked a little bit about and around the solutions piece, but are they data driven? Um, and again, the systems and processes being in place are going to help you for that. The more that you're able to kind of document those elements of your operation and give those data points, that helps you to create everything from, charts and graphs that you can show somebody as to what your trajectory looks like for delivery. And it also goes to say, hey, we have those in place so that we can determine what areas we're not really operating at our, maybe our best, and gives us targets to go after for future process improvements, things like that. Very data driven is where the world is going. And we'll, again, in webinar number 5, we'll talk a little bit more about that, about those different crazy, data solutions that are out there right now that are just mind blowing. So if you're interested in kind of future state, come back for number 5 in a couple of weeks. Knowing your limits, and I won't belabor that. We've kind of talked about a little bit about that. Knowing what capacity you have, knowing what you're able to do, what you're not able to do, stretching and reaching for something that you think that you're already on the trajectory to get based off of your data. That might be an extremely wise decision. Good on you, right? Taking on something that you have no chance of getting, and there's never, 10,000 above what you've ever delivered. Okay, maybe that's not going to help build integrity and trust in your group, or in your field. And that's, again, long term, that's what you're looking at for a long term successful company. Integrity and trust are extremely important, because you want to continue to gain the business that you've already got. You want to maintain it, and then you want to grow slowly and steadily over time, so that you can have that longevity of being in business. And then finally, taking the extra step. I mentioned that a little bit as well. And this is just a general good practice. Doesn't have to be crazy. Doesn't have to be tons of extra money that you're throwing at something and losing money and whatnot. But just being willing to say, I'm not good being status quo. I want to go just one step further, because that will distinguish you. In many cases that I've seen, that's what's distinguished suppliers from being, good to great. A standard supplier to the top tier supplier. It's just being willing to say, hey, that discussion we had the other day, you were talking about this problem. We've actually dealt with that before. Have you ever thought about whatever? Right. And that, just that little bit of extra following up regularly on that. Let's say, you helped them, you had an hour-long meeting to try to help them navigate through some of the industry elements, it's kind of from the first example that we used. You helped them do that. And a couple of weeks following up, hey, did you all, were you able to figure that out? I know we talked about it, and just trying to help you out if you need any more support. That type of thing, it's not expected necessarily, but it just, again, it puts you into that top tier supplier, and it's somebody that a person or a company wants to go back to, that can distinguish you from maybe a mid tier supplier to a top tier supplier. Are there any questions about any of these? I'm going to try not to take us too.
No. Oh, I'm sorry, Trina Waifel just asked a question. Can you give a real-life example of a service-oriented supplier and how to implement processes such as advertisers, public relations, lobbyists, versus nut and bolt manufacturing?
Sorry, Dave, can you ask me that one more time? I
Yeah,
missed a couple
yeah,
elements.
sure. Can you give a real-life example of a service-oriented supplier and how to implement processes? For example, advertisers, public relations, and lobbyists versus nuts and bolts manufacturing.
A service industry, and how to implement processes. And so, okay, it could be as simple as something like following, just a following up schedule. It could be, recognizing that um, that certain information within your operation, let's say, needs to be delivered to a group at a certain time. And then that starts getting, your time starts getting thin because you also have meetings and you have, all these other different things that you're trying to do. You're trying to continue to have the top tier service element that might not, you might not be producing a physical product, but you have standard, let's say you're one of the things that might help you is delivering elements like this, like a webinar. This isn't. I'm not creating anything. All I am, I'm basically service industry. I'm taking knowledge and I'm just delivering it out. I'm doing webinar course as well. If I don't have a very strict schedule and set up times for me to actually develop the content of my courses, I'm going to be winging it an awful lot. And there's not going to have the impact. It's not going to have the slides. It's not going to have. So what I've done in my personal experience is I've set up times within my schedule where I block off certain days, and I've given myself goals and achievement goals. Okay, I need to have this many webinar series completed by this date, and then I can go back in and say, all right, of those, what do I need to do? Well, I need to build slides. I need to have content. I need to have all this. So the content needs to be done by January 5. And then I can start tracking it. If it's not done by January 5, I start putting X's in the box of my timeline that I create based on a schedule. And that starts to tell me if it's red or I got X's in those boxes, ooh, I'm behind. I'm not going to be able to meet those overall deadlines and goals. And you can do that with different products, even though it might be intangible products that you create. And you can start to just organize and prioritize different elements. And you might be able to say, okay, I know sending out this email is really important, maybe to me, because I really like to tell people where I'm at with my maybe consulting practice. But is that as important as creating the content for your next meeting? Well, probably not. So you want to build in those elements of priority within that scheduling and just becoming really organized and starting to create charts and graphs. And it almost turns it into a tangible operation when you start to think about it, because all of these elements have to be built and have to be documented. They have to be slid into a particular time slot in order to make sure that that final goal is achieved. So the way that I do that is I work backwards. I say, what is my ultimate delivery? And then how long is it going to take me to get there? I work backwards and I say, well, this has to be done before that. Then that would have to be done before this. And I start to frame out that overall kind of large scale. Now we're getting really heavily into strategy, which I also love to talk about. But I strategically place those elements of things that have to be done within my work day. I put them on a calendar. I give myself deadlines. I give myself goals. And then if I haven't achieved those goals, I have makeup, or what am I doing? Where am I gaining extra hours in order to ensure that those elements get done? And then it starts to become much more of a tangible operation as opposed to a theoretical, or maybe an operation that's done more up here and less in the hands. Does that answer the question?
If not, feel free to come off of mute to follow up. Oh, yep. She says yes, thanks.
Absolutely. Very good question. Awesome. Well, I don't want to take us too far. And actually, I kind of built in the last slide just as almost a reminder of what we've already spoken about. I did want to make some connections. If you're interested in the cost, speed, quality, and rarity, and how that kind of feeds into the expertise, operations, communications, delivery, and solutions element. Essentially, what I was going to do here, and I will just, like I said, briefly, because I know we're up against time, but this is a good way of taking this last slide, and we'll send out the slides, and just kind of saying, all right, how can I take all of these points and feed them back in with the thought of cost? Because cost and speed, let's say, are your two key elements within your operation. Your company, okay, now we're going all the way back to number one, your company why, and why you do things. The outworking of that is into the how you do things. And if your company has a specific trajectory, you're getting all this into alignment. Your company has a trajectory of why you do the things you do. And then you have your how and what you do kind of weaved into that. And a part of that strategy is, you want to be a cost-effective supplier. You want to be a speedy supplier, right? So how do you look at these elements of expertise in the industry, operations, communications, delivery, and solutions to pinpoint that, to help you create a solid communication strategy and a solid maybe contractual strategy for your teams to kind of outline those key things that you've determined either A, that your customer needs you to be, or B, that it's just your bread and butter. It's what you want to be. I'd say there needs to be definitely a combination of those two things. But how do you use these to get better on those elements? So, and I won't go through each and every one of them, but for, let's just say, for speed, and expertise, how can you show that your expertise of your operation leads to a speed? Well, when you're communicating this with a potential customer, you can say, I understand that getting something very, very quickly is important to you. And here's what we've done within our operation. Maybe you have a lean strategy. You can explain parts of your lean strategy and how that leads you to be a little bit more moving things more quickly because you have less waste. So less things holding you back. Let's say quality is your piece. How do you explain in communication? How do you communicate quickly and precisely your operation? And we have an expertise, and we've gained this throughout the years, and here's what our expertise is. And we have recognized that we have to have certain elements of quality inspections within our operation in order to ensure that we don't see quality issues downstream in our processing. So here's what we've implemented. And then we have a final quality inspection, or we have a quality inspection at the front end. And we determined, some of the products that we're putting into our next higher level assembly, sometimes they come in with quality defect, and we have actually a receiving quality operation that pulls those out before they ever get to the manufacturing floor. It helps with speed and it helps with quality. So we're making sure that we're getting you the best, most qualified, the highest quality product as quickly as we possibly can. So just being able to point to that when you're in those discussions is really important. So again, you can go through each of those and kind of say, oh, now that I see that this would be very good if I was able to communicate this, how do I focus that in on that cost element, the speed element, the quality, and the rarity element? How do I take my organization? How do I take my operation as a supplier and feed it back in through those different elements that your customers need? That is going to make you an extremely, extremely efficient and desirable supplier. I have so much more I could say, but I will kind of pause there and see if there's any more questions. I know we're pretty close to the end.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions so far. We'll give everybody a minute in case they're typing something in, or if you want to come off a mute and speak up, feel free to. Not seeing anything come in, Adam.
All right. Well, that's cool. You know what? I will make one more point. And I made it at the beginning, and I wanted to kind of follow up here at the end with it. Being a solutions provider really is a key element of the thought process. So the first webinar we did was a lot about big picture thinking, or just thinking through your operation. Make sure that you're weaving that in as being a solutions provider. That can be one of the main things. Taking the extra step and being a solutions provider are two of the main things that really help to build trust and integrity of your operation. Speaking, and not letting things fester, not letting something get way out of control before you actually communicate that. Things like that are what really help as a supplier, and make you that kind of that top tier. So if you're aiming to be that top tier supplier, again, timely, precise communication, extremely important. Taking the next step. When and where, or where is your material, and when are they going to get it? Answering that question up front, and then being willing to provide those extra solutions and being solutions minded, coming in and seeing, are there other things you can do to help your customers out? And are there other things that your vendors can do to help you out, and being able to communicate that? If you get those things right, generally speaking, a lot of the other items fall in place. As long as, and this is another plug I'll make, the operations have key strategic uh, um, systems and processes that are documented. That helps with training. It helps with all kinds of elements of your operation, data, training, the whole shebang. If you can get that right, those are what, when you're looking to get a supplier, a new supplier, especially when you can point to those things within your organization that are operating really well, and you can tell exactly all those details per the data, and provide those solutions. That's how you really distinguish yourself as a key supplier.
All right. We'll give another second for any final questions. We still have a couple minutes left. If there's anything anybody's dying to ask about this, or anything they want clarification on. All right. Well, looks like you're doing a good job, Adam. Not a lot of questions. So You're explaining it all really well.
Well, good. And I'm happy to answer any type of questions. I would encourage, again, communication with the WVIE group, IE group. Thank you so much for bringing me in. I love this. This is so great. I'm so happy to be able to reach out and impact suppliers and folks in West Virginia and organizations and operations there. So if there are questions, feed them through Dave and team. I'm happy to answer those. And yeah. I appreciate the attendance and folks sticking with us along the way. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about the if you need help to identify some of these areas that you might not be maybe where you would like to be, come back. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then in a couple of weeks, and I don't remember the date off the top of my head, but we're going to have that in person, Dave, meeting. I think that will be extremely helpful as well. There's going to be a lot of good knowledge that comes out of that roundtable in. And I don't have the plug for it here, but I would encourage thinking about that as well. If y'all have the
Yeah, that's going to
more
be,
data on that.
I mean, 1 second. I know it's March, but I don't want to say the wrong date. And
It's
that's
March
what I did.
6th.
March
March
6th. There you go. Well, that's going to be an in-person event. And I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to learning there. I got a lot of great folks that are coming, so I would encourage that as well.
Great. All right. Well, Adam, as always, thanks for the valuable content. Thanks for your time. And thanks everybody else for joining us today. Be sure to register for the additional sessions if you haven't already. And feel free to follow up with Adam or myself with any questions. And we'll hope to see you again here next Thursday. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
Adam.
Appreciate y'all.